Now we're going to take a look at the second chapter in the Day textbook. This is about the institution of social welfare and how it functions in our society. Also, a little bit, again, some key core concepts, basic concepts about how the profession of social work and the human services profession interact with and work within the social welfare system. Now, one of the things that we need to kind of refer back to before we get started is a little bit about the Elizabethan or English Poor Laws of 1601, because these poor laws form the philosophical basis for the social welfare programming in the United States. And as you begin to move through the chapters that follow in this textbook, you're going to actually kind of go back to some early social welfare, early history of social welfare in ancient societies and things like this. Chapters 3 and 4 really kind of trace the beginnings of social welfare back into pretty ancient times, in fact. And so this kind of gets pulled out of the middle of that when we talk about the Elizabethan Poor Laws, but this is really kind of where the idea of social welfare in the United States arises from England. And just to set the stage a little bit for that, there was a problem in the 1600s and the 15 and 1600s all over Europe, in fact, about individuals who were known as vagabonds, and basically these are the same individuals we would call the homeless today, but not having large cities generally to stay around, they would move about the countryside and go from small community to small community, really tiny hamlets and villages, who were really poorly equipped to be able to manage the needs of those individuals. And so a system had to develop about what to do about poor people, because there wasn't an economic basis, there wasn't the social welfare systems and programs in place. Churches oftentimes were the source of charity in those days, but the churches that existed, in fact, were very poor themselves, and so laws had to be established about how to deal with the needy in those societies. And the Elizabethan Poor Laws in 1601 was really what was formulated in England, at least at that period of time, to address that problem. And the upshot of this, and we'll look more at this as in the next few weeks. In fact, we'll look a little bit more closely at this. But the family in this system is seen as primarily responsible for the poor person. That if you can't take care of yourself, your family is then responsible to see to it that your needs are met. And this is effective only to the extent that the family system, that is effective only to the extent that it maintains the social order and promotes the economic viability of its members. The family is sort of the core of society and economic life as far as Elizabethan or English poor laws are concerned. And so much of American society has kind of developed from that belief system. Another text that I taught out of one time, and this is not in your text, but this is material that I think is very important for you to know. It came out of a text by authors Axon and Levin. I think that text is still out there floating around in a newer edition now. They identified 4 factors that affect the development of social welfare programs and policies in a society. And I would really like for you to learn these 4 factors, because it helps you understand what the influences are in society that determine the kind of programs that are implemented in society, what are put in place. When do we get new programs? When do we not? When is there support for programs being established, and in what conditions are they not those conditions there that doesn't support them? And so these 4 factors are, first, the level of output of a society. That if an economy is doing poorly, there are less funds available for social programs, and so there will be fewer social programs. If the economy is doing well, more programs will be instituted because there's more money out there. Okay, that pretty much makes sense. The level of output of society. If there's more money, there'll be more programs in a society. If less, there'll be more restricted programs. The second factor that affects the development of social welfare programs and policies is the view of societal effectiveness. How do individuals in society think it's functioning? So if a society is seen as functioning effectively, those who find it hard to survive are seen as individual failures. If the society is seen as operating ineffectively, then the demand is for institutional change, and it is that we don't blame the individual. So in the United States, those in control at least, and most of us believe that the society is functioning effectively economically. I mean, we look all about us and we see all sorts of signs of wealth and good fortune. Therefore, the individuals who aren't doing well, who aren't functioning that successfully in society, then are viewed as individual failures, and our inclination is really not to try to help them very much. And that really is very much the state of affairs in the United States today, right? But not 100 years ago, but 70 or 80 years ago, during the Great Depression, when people who had never needed help and who had stood on their own, in fact had been wealthy, suddenly found themselves in lines for loaves of bread and those kinds of things, we recognized that the economic system was the reason for the failure of individuals to succeed, and all sorts of new programs were put into place eventually through the New Deal to address those issues. And so this is an example. If we think the society is functioning effectively, then we're going to blame the individual for poverty. But when society isn't functioning very well, if we view it as not functioning well, then we base it on the system. We blame the system. Okay, so amount of money, our view of society. Third, a view of human nature. And if a society sees people as being naturally lazy and sinful, then the social welfare programs that they put in place are going to be developed to control them and deter them. Whereas if a society sees human beings as essentially good, positively oriented, then the programs that are put in place will provide incentive and encourage human development. So what is our view of human nature? What do we really think about people? That's another thing that determines the kinds of programs that are put in place. And finally, the historical heritage of a society, that if there's a history providing for the needy in a society's culture, then it's more likely that the programs are going to be put in place to that end. So again, the level of output, or the amount of money in a society, our view of how effective society is functioning, our view of human beings and what they are like naturally, and our history, our historical heritage as far as helping needy. These are the four things that impact the kinds of programs that are put in place and policies that are implemented in a society. Now, keeping in mind that social welfare has two functions, remember, social control, social treatment, Day and Schiele identify 4 different reasons for allocating services. There are 4 different reasons that a society will provide help to needy people. One is what's called attributed need, and attributed need is the need for services are seen as being the result of inadequacies in the system. This would be things like, well, public education, where there are insufficient resources to be able to provide for the consistent education of everybody in society without public supporting education. So public education, Medicare programs, perhaps, although that has come under some scrutiny and attack lately, and might not actually fit into attributed need anymore. Daycare is another example. Meals on Wheels, where it's just because the elderly. And with these programs, the hallmark is that really they're available to anybody that needs them. There's no stigma associated with it. So that's attributed need. That's social welfare basically in its purest charitable form. The next category or reason for allocating services is compensation, and this is where the system is paying a debt for services. So for instance, veterans benefits, Social Security, that's a debt to those who have worked their whole life and contributed to the economic system. There's some debate, some people receiving Social Security really believe that's attributed need, that there's no stigma and they get it because they've worked and it's their money, so to speak. That's not really at all what it is. But compensation pays this debt for services that have been rendered, and so an individual has to do something, to get services, had to have done something at least to get services in this category. But there's really, again, low stigma associated with it. Now, stigma increases as you move down this list. And diagnostic differentiation being the next reason for services, that that an individual has some sort of deficiencies that is assessed by a professional qualifies for services in this category. So the developmentally disabled, those who have mental health problems, those who have health problems, those kinds of things. If you have a diagnosis, you get services under this category, and there is more stigma associated with this. And a good indication of that is the fact that, for instance, individuals receiving mental health services generally, mental health centers don't call themselves mental health centers anymore. They call them behavioral health centers, or for that matter, sometimes you can't even find behavioral health. Mental health centers have come to hide themselves in larger organizations, and it really demonstrates, I think, to the shame of that profession. That the profession buys into the stigma, that there's a stigma associated with getting services because of a diagnosis. Okay, finally, the last category is the means-tested need. Clients in this category get this help only because they are seen as personally deficient. There's something about them that they are not able to make ends meet. They don't fit into any categories otherwise. And this would be your public assistance programs, ATAP or TANF, food stamps, SSI, Medicaid. These are ones where you have to go in and you have to prove that you need it. And this is the high in stigma, very, very high in stigma. It's in this culture, it's a shame-based kind of a programming, sad to say. So in any event, that's the 4 reasons for allocating services that you find in the textbook. In addition, Day-Schiele talk about two different perspectives in social welfare, one being the institutional, the other being the residual perspective. And the institutional perspective indicates that every person has a right to services, and there's little or no stigma at that end, so that whatever your need is, you have a right to get those services to fill that need, and you should not be ashamed of seeking help. The residual end of that continuum, so to speak, is that aid that is given in the smallest amount possible for the shortest amount of time conceivable. There's very high stigma, so that individuals, again, there's a lot of shame associated with seeking services at this end. It's very hard to get these services, and you don't get to keep them for very long once you get them. So that's the residual end. So now if you combine the perspectives with the reasons for allocating services, this is how these 4 reasons for allocating services fit in this perspective. Again, you can see attributed need. We're talking about things like Meals on Wheels, public education, perhaps senior services, those kinds of things where there's no stigma. You can get it as long as you need it, get as much as you need. The society just provides it. Compensation for services, something you've done on behalf of society for veterans and workers through veterans benefits, Social Security. Diagnostic differentiation for those individuals who have a mental health or developmental disability or medical disability, those kinds of things that require services that you have to have a diagnosis to get. And then the means-tested programs, which would be the public assistance kinds of programs like SSI and TANF, ATAP, food stamps, those kinds of things. So you see how they fit in the institutional and the residual continuum there. Again, the further to the right, the higher the stigma. To the left, the lower the stigma. I think you could also say the further to the right, the shorter term the services, the more justification is needed for those services. The further to the left, the longer term, the less amount of justification needed. In a truly generous social welfare system, there would be many more services provided on the institutional end than in the residual end of this continuum. I believe in our culture, most services that are provided, social welfare programming, for the needy at least, is on the residual end. And I will add that this is not the case in most of the industrialized world. Most of the industrialized world provides all sorts of services for its families for whatever reason towards the institutional end of that perspective. More on that as the semester goes on. What do social workers and human services workers do? And Day-Schiele address this as well, how they interact with the institution of social welfare. And they identify 4 different areas of general areas of work that we find ourselves in. This includes life necessity services. These are things that are necessary for survival, like public assistance certification, taking care of emergency needs of individuals, facilitating Medicaid, Social Security Administration, those kinds of things. These are life necessity services that you may find yourself working in. Education, recreation, rehabilitation. These are the kinds of things where a lot of times there's socialization or habilitation or rehabilitation services for those who have been disabled, those who need psychiatric or mental health assistance. Children in daycare, working in recreational facilities and things like this. You may find yourself working in protective or custodial services, and this includes things like child protection and adult protection, foster care, nursing homes, prisons, youth detention facilities, those kinds of things, where the goal of the work is the protection of the client or protection of society or both. Or you may find yourself working in personal social services, which are really geared towards promoting growth and remediation, and things like being a therapist at a mental health center or in a private practice for that matter, providing counseling services in different kinds of counseling settings, that type of thing. So there's a number of different things that you may find yourselves doing when you work in human services and social work. Originally, social work's mission was personal, it was not personal, but really was social intervention. That is, initially the profession's focus was upon the reform of poverty and its causes, and it wasn't about changing individuals. It was about changing the system. Individuals like Jane Addams with her settlement house movement in Hull House in Chicago, for instance, that worked with individuals who lived in the inner cities, immigrants, and tried to help them organize and gain a better understanding or a better command of the language and an understanding of the American system so that they could fend for themselves better in our system. That approach really kind of appeals to the strengths of the client. Whereas the medical model, which is what is used by most individuals working in personal social work, tends to emphasize the deficiencies and defects, let's say, in individuals that kind of turn them into our patient and not a strong person. It really focuses upon reforming the weaknesses in an individual so they function better in society. So rather than helping an individual challenge society so that society may change, the individual in personal social work oftentimes is working with the individual to have them change to fit in better to society. Well, the mission is still social in nature, dealing with the elements beyond the clients. And one of the things that the social work profession has done is sort of blend the two so that we work in what is called a person in situation or ecological model. You don't necessarily just work with the individual, but you also work with the individual and work on the relationships that individual has with other family members in the school system, in the probation system, in the community at large, whatever it might be. You don't see that individual in the context of just your interaction with them, but you see them in the bigger picture, and you help them learn to find ways to deal with the different elements of their life more successfully. Again, this is something that we'll be talking about more as the semester goes along. But the goal of social work practice has been to help individuals function optimally, optimal social functioning in the problematic areas of their life. It's sort of become a fix-it kind of profession instead of one that was focused upon social interventions and reforming society. Once again, not having checked where my slides end, I think this is the last slide, so let's just see. Nope. One more slide. She'll write that says, unlike clients in other helping professions, the social work client may be an individual, a group, a family, an organization, a neighborhood group, or a political body. But the focus of practice is the client in situation. social work as a profession has emerged from three different movements in our history with different underlying ideologies. One, the Charity Organization Society, or COSs, when we'll be studying about these much more thoroughly some weeks down the road here. The COSs really are the basis for the casework model that most of us employ in the social work profession. This is where we work with the client to help them get along more effectively in society. We work with them primarily on an individual basis. The child saving movement is sort of a separate kind of movement that really focused on the welfare of children and getting kids out of bad situations and into better situations. And in some respects, the child protection system and the juvenile justice system have evolved and grown out of the child saving movement, but in other respects not. Finally, the settlement house movement, which was the movement I was talking about a few moments ago, where instead of focusing upon changing the individual, the focus is really upon working with the individual to change society, to help bring about social change rather than individual treatment. And so these are the three fields of practice in social work, and again, really for the largest. For the most part, I would say to you, you can think about two branches in the social work profession, and this is something to keep track of in the course of the reading through the day text, because she really talks about these two branches quite a bit. That is the individual treatment, that branch that works to help individuals change and adjust, that had grown out of the charity organization societies, and the social treatment or social change branch of social work, which really has grown from the settlement house movement of 100 years ago or so. A long way away from the end, it looks like, but I think we're getting closer as we go along. Finally, areas of direct practice, and these if you look at this list, this is what you're going to. We talked about different areas that you might work in. Now, when you what kinds of things might you do within those areas, those four areas? And so these are the fields of practice in social work. And if you look at this list, there are 5 different fields of practice or areas of direct practice. The goes from the most personal to the broadest impact. So casework has the most narrow focus, let's say, the individual usually, or the individual and his family or her family. Research and testing has this very broad kind of thing that really doesn't look at any one person at all, but really kind of just looks at theories and ways to change and improve things. And that's, sort of looking for new approaches and knowledge and things like that. And so from the most personal to the least personal, as far as impact is concerned. And so and also from the most narrow to the broadest. So as you go down this list, the impact of your work, I think, increasingly affects more and more people. Casework, group work, community practice, policy and administration, and research and teaching. I truly believe this is the last slide. Has the social work profession abandoned social action in an effort to increase its own identity as a profession? As you study during the semester, and Day-Schiele kind of tell you more about the history, the development of the social work profession, and with it really the human services profession, I think this is a question that is worth considering. Have we abandoned social action in favor of individual intervention, largely based on the medical model, because it helps us to be identified more as professionals? The Charity Organization Society movement focused much of its efforts on casework, that is changing the individual, and much less on system change. And as we work through this course, the reasons for this are going to be understood much more clearly, I think. And so, yes, that was the last slide, and this will conclude the lecture for Chapter 2. If you'll stay with me now, we have another chapter this week. Chapter 3 looks as a very brief look at a very expansive period of history in the development of social welfare in its early years. So come back and join me for more.